recording. And, I will leave the floor to Professor Ilan Pape and Mrs. Nina Carlos Bazouzi. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco, first of all, for organizing this very important event. Thank you, Nadia, also for taking the trouble and the time to make it possible. More than anything else, we want to thank Nina for giving us her time and thoughts in this particular moment in the history of Jerusalem and Palestine. So we're very happy on behalf of the European Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK to host Nina. I think she doesn't need much of introduction for most of you, but the reason, first of all, that we asked Nina to talk to us is because of her memoirs, Living Through the Nakba, Tales of a Palestinian Youth, and because of her amazing and incredible life story that we want to hear about and talk about. Nina Bazouzi Colors was born in Jerusalem, in Palestine. She lived after the Nakba as a refugee in Bethlehem. She is a graduate of the American University of Beirut. Currently, Nina lives in the state of Virginia and has been an American citizen for several years. She was a public school teacher in the states of Maryland and Virginia for more than 20 years. She's married to the multi-generational American citizen and has 4 children and 5 grandchildren, and may she live long. Nina, the floor is yours, just to say to the people, after Nina's conversation with us and talk, Francesco, whom you all met at the beginning, will take over and will moderate any questions or comments that you will have in this webinar. So I wish us all a very good evening and a successful evening, and thank you everyone for making the efforts of being with us. And Nina, the floor is yours.
Greetings. Thank you so much for hosting me. I am most honored and delighted to do that. I think I'm going to start by saying what triggered this memoir. I was visiting in Jerusalem in the year 2005, I suppose, and a cousin came from California, and we decided to go to Gaza. She had an aunt who lived in Gaza, the Tarazi family. They have never been refugees. They were the original inhabitants of the Gaza Strip. So we went to visit them. The border was closed, but through the embassy, we were able to get in. And we had a legal passage to go to Gaza. While we were there, a skirmish happened that caused a little of havoc. Wedding parade triggered some gunshots and some such happening that happens frequently. And immediately when that happened, the border was closed. We were there for just a couple of days. Consequently, we were unable to leave. And the reason being because, as I said, the border was closed. I have high blood pressure, and I took enough pills for a couple of days, maybe 2-3 days, thinking that the extent of what I needed. But when the border closed, I realized I would be out of medication. So I called the embassy and said, I'm an American citizen, I need to get out. And I asked them to help facilitate the exodus for our group. And I was delayed every day for 2-3 days. We've kept calling the embassy. no response, or what they said, yeah, we know, and giving us all these reasons. So I had to do without my blood pressure pills. And when I came out finally, I thought, here I am, an American citizen, having that little incident happen to me, and how frustrating it was. How about those people who for years live there and are suffering more than the word can realize how hard it is? I had the chance of going through the town and experiencing the hardships that people there came. And that made me decide I must become an activist. I must tell the story. I can tell my story as well. And luckily for me, I was one that didn't suffer as much. But here we are 70 plus years after, and those poor people are still suffering. And the world has become callous to their plight. I come from a Christian family, and I'm only saying that to say that people in Palestine prior to the British mandate lived under the Ottoman regime, and the last few years of their presence in Palestine were hard, even though when the Ottomans were there, Christians, Muslims, and the local Jewish people lived in harmony. They lived a good life. There was kindness, hospitality, and a good, clean life that they experienced. But then World War I brought the British in, and along came that promise that was done prior to the war, the Balfour Declaration, and the Jewish people who were suffering under the German rule at the time were frustrated and wanted to come to their promised land, and the British made it possible. But there were lots of more people coming than was expected at the time, and the Arabs, seeing what was happening, were very frustrated. This was the background of the Palestinian-Israeli problem. My family came from the old city. Both parents lived in the old city. But when the British came, life took on a better turn. Jobs became available, and the Palestinians, especially the city people, lived what they called the good life. The high life, actually, that's what they called it, the high life. They started leaving the old city, going to the suburbs, places like Katamon, Baka, Talbiye. All these suburbs were inhabited by people Palestinians who were educated. They came and with the ability to build new homes. These villas are, sometimes you see them on people showing their old homes. They're beautiful houses, all chiseled stone, some of them red stone that is very rare, and equipped with all the beauty and luxury that villas could have. Their gardens, they had gardens where they would hire gardeners to come and do the work. They had crystal oriental rugs, chandeliers, you name it, and they had that there. And it was there where the Nakba had its facing. The British who were still there, they came there for 30 years, started getting they started getting problems from some of the Jewish gangs who were determined to allow their people to come in, regardless of the fact that the British tried to slow that down. But they came in numbers and with the intention of taking the land. It was not a land without a people, as was claimed. It was a land that was inhabited by Palestinians, most of whom were Arabs. 80% of the population at the time were Arabs, Christians and Muslims, and Jews. You know, the Jews of the land were fine. They lived happily with the Christians and Muslims. But lots of skirmishes and sabotages that were done by these gangs, the Irgun, the Haganah, they had names, and they scared the British. And that resulted in one incident that left a mark on me that cannot be erased. They demolished, they bombed the King David Hotel. There were people from my family who worked there. The part of the King David Hotel was used to house the offices of British nationals who were there to take care of, this was the result of World War I, and the British, World War I and II, because they won the war in World War I. Now my daughter is correcting me. It was World War I that brought the British, and they were there during the World War II. But anyway, because they left in 48 and the Nakba happened afterwards. But the point is here to show is that it was the Jews and those gangs that came with the intention of usurping the land, of getting it from the natives who were already living there, to make room for all the European Jews that came from Eastern Europe and then from Russia as well. What was I? Yeah, well, I will mention an incident right after that affected me, because I have the tendency to digress and get into all kinds of tangents. But anyway, my parents, after they got married, lived in Katamon. They had a humble place, but still very well equipped, and their dream was to give their children an education that they themselves did not have much of. They were unable to have a formal education due to family reasons at the time, even though my father's uncle was a well-known educator and he could have gone to one of his schools. Khalil Sakakini was a very prominent educator. People who studied under him can mention the effect he had on generations of Palestinians. And even now, I just recently had someone in Ramallah who works for the Ministry of Education to contact me to find a little more about not only Khalil Sakakini, but his sister, Milia, who was my grandmother's sister, who was in her own way a feminist at the time. She was a school teacher devoted to education. And not only that, she led a lot of Palestinian women in a demonstration against the British. But Uncle Khalil was a humanitarian person, besides being an educator, which is also a humanitarian activity. And anyway, what was I saying? Where am I? About the Katamon. All right. My daughter is my prompter. Anyway, she knows how I go on tangents. No, I was telling you about my background, about living in Katamon, going to an English school at a young age, and the emphasis my parents had on education. At that time, one very terrible night that sticks in my memory, that will never be erased, and is cause even today at my age of my insecurity and fear. I do have a few unreasonable fears, all related to that one terrible incident in 1947 on New Year's Eve, when a hotel very close to our home was bombed, the Semiramis Hotel. This hotel was a very close distance from our house. And when that incident happened, my daughter is going to read to you a little passage from my memoir that relates to that incident. Rana is my daughter.
Hello, how are you? So I'm going to read about that from her memoir. It was raining more than usual on that frightening night. The thunder and lightning seemed excessive. We went to bed later than usual. At midnight, we were wakened by a loud sound that seemed like an explosion. Immediately after that, there was a light that shone brightly, penetrating the darkness and blinding us. This was followed by a great big bang, which shook the house, breaking the window glass and shattering some of the crystal glasses and china in the china closet. Mama got out of bed and instinctively, after the first blast, ran to Henna's bed, which was by the window, and picked him up. The second blast was stronger and broke the glass of the window next to his bed. Over and over, my parents repeated the events of that night and would mention the strange impulse that compelled Mama to pick up Henna out of his bed. The second blast that broke the glass from the window next to my brother's bed would have hurt him. Nellie and I were already awake and screaming when Dad got us out of bed, picking up a mattress and taking it to the corridor away from the windows, and we lay there where it was thought to be safe. We were all shaken by the blast. At first, we thought it was thunder that we heard, but this was louder than thunder. Dad thought it was an earthquake, but no one mentioned explosions. We were terrified as we huddled together on the mattress on the floor. It took a while for Dad to pry Henna from Mama's arms. In her fear for him, she held him so tightly, and it seemed like her arms froze around him. She then steadied herself and sat with us on the mattress. Then she extended her arms to reach Nellie and me. I remember crying out loud and saying, "I don't want to die." Nellie was calmer. In her sweet voice, she told me, "That is all right. If we die, we will go to heaven." I remember saying hysterically, "No, I don't want to go to heaven." Henna was silent, lying on Mama's lap. We lay there scared to death, huddled together the rest of the night. All I could think of was, if this was not thunder and lightning or an earthquake, then it must be explosions of bombs. I could not shake the image of the blown-up wing of the King David Hotel that I had seen a few months before.
So this was the beginning of the Nakba for us. Immediately after that, my grandmother sent a taxi with one of my uncles and said, bring Neda, my mother, and her family immediately to the old city, which was supposed to be a little safer at the time. So there we went right after Christmas. Christmas, we're Orthodox, our Christmas follows the Gregorian calendar, and it's a week after the regular 25th of December that we all celebrate now. Anyway, it's the cover of my book, if you remember. These were the gifts that were given to us that Christmas. We only had one big gift. Mine was a doll that could close and open her eyes and say, Mama. This was a doll I've craved for a long time. My mom would not let me take it with me as we were getting ready to leave to go to the old city, because she said, your grandmother's house is going to be cluttered and there are lots of people there. We don't have room for toys. She said, we'll just stay there a few days till it gets settled. We'll come back home. But that was the end. We left with all our belongings. And so did people who, each family has its own story to tell about the Nakba. This was the beginning of the Nakba. We went to the old city in Jerusalem, and my grandmother had us to stay in her basement. The dining room was in the first floor, and they moved the table aside, and we had that room where we would sleep and play, and we didn't play actually. Here we were 3 children in the prime of our youth at that time, sitting there for 4 months while the siege of Jerusalem took place. We could not make noise, we could not play, we didn't have books to read, we didn't have toys to play with. We just sat around the adults who tried to shelter us from hearing what was going on. Stories about Deir Yassin and all this, the activities that took place during the Nakba, that prior to the armistice, would come, and my mother would distract us from hearing all that was going on. Everybody in the evening would huddle around the radio that had a big battery to hear the news, and they were news of exaggerated stories about the fact that the Arabs were winning and the things were on our side, and the Arab soldiers are coming to rescue us. But nothing really of that sort happened. We were sieged in Jerusalem. My uncles worked on the wall. They had a little hospital there, and 2 of my uncles were there with the rescue squad there that were caring for the wounded on the wall of the old city. And my grandmother had enough food in the house to take care of us, so we didn't suffer from lack of food. But here we were, the 3 of us in my family, waiting, trying to read the faces of the adults that said things that they tried to keep from us. This was the Nakba. As a result of that, we couldn't go back to our home. We had to find a way to exist. So we moved to Bethlehem, and there is where we went to school and, stayed until 1967 when I went to college, and my parents stayed there, and I was separated from them again. And when the Nakba took place, after the Nakba came in 67, the Nakba, what we call the second war that made it impossible for us to dream of ever going back to our homes. So I think I should stop here and answer the questions that you have. I didn't digress too much, did I? I did well.
Nina,
all right, thank you.
can you-
My critic
Nina-
is here.
Nina, can you tell us about your experience in Beit Safafa when Beit Safafa
Okay.
was divided?
Yes, I can. I was a teacher in for UNRWA before I went to college. And then I became a principal of a school in Beit Safafa. I was there. My age was, I was 21, 22 or something like that. Anyway, Beit Safafa was a village. Prior to the Nakba, it was one of those villages that supplied vegetables and fruit to Jerusalem. All these villages around Jerusalem were there to supply food to the cities around them. And it was not very far from Jerusalem. The school that I taught at was, well, let me say, in 1948, when the armistice divided the Palestinian border from the Israeli border, they put the line in the midst of a road in Beit Safafa. This road separated the village, a small village, into Palestinians on one side and Israelis, but they were the same people. They were cousins on one side and children whose parents were on the other side. It was difficult. When I taught there, it was in 1960, the school was situated on the border in front of the wired fence. Two occasions allowed the people to get together. In other words, not to be physically together, but to see each other and communicate with each other when there was a funeral and also when there was a wedding. They allowed them to parade along the fence and communicate with their relatives. Actually, the custodian of the school had a fiancé on the other side, and every 2-3 weeks he would be caught talking with her, and they would take him. There was always a guard on the Jordanian side, because that was the part that was annexed to Jordan, and a guard on the Israeli side to see to it that the two sides did not communicate. And so our custodian would sneak some letters to his fiancée, who was his cousin, by the way, on the other side. Consequently, he would be caught and put in jail for a few, maybe a week or a few days. And then he would repeat it over and over. He didn't care. He had to communicate with his fiancée. And this was the situation in that village. I had a mural painted, and I think it might still be there at the school, of the fence, the wired fence, and chicken going in and out without any worry of being jailed, and birds flying over that wired fence. They had more privileges than the humans in that little village. And then it's on the other side of my book, the front side has our family picture at that last Christmas. And the other side is a picture of a funeral at Beit Safafa, where the two sides were allowed to parade, walking with each other and communicating with each other. And the coffin also displayed as they walked up and down that fence. This was Beit Safafa at that time when I was teaching there. Any other questions?
Thank you so much. I would like to ask to our audience if they have any questions, if they want to open up their microphone, if they want to speak, just let us know. Otherwise, I will ask something. we can keep on stimulating the conversation. But if you, this event is for you, first of all. So, just feel free to open the microphone if you want to say something.
Yeah. Any questions?
Okay.
What I may comment about.
Okay. I think Nidal wanted to raise his hand. Okay.
Thank you. I was trying to write something out, but
okay.
Nina, with so many different people coming to different locations from all parts of Palestine, how was it for Palestinians to relate to each other in a very awkward and uncomfortable moment, but also then having to be introduced or exposed to so many different people from around all of Palestine? I remember Raja Shaheda's book, Stranger in the Town, I think that's the name, where he talks about the disillusion of the towns and how so many people ended up being lost. How could you keep your family? How did your mom and dad keep your family together? And how was their attitude of having to relate to so many different people from different parts of Palestine? If that's not a very convulsive type of a question. Thank you.
Well, I can see what you are telling me. In 1948, people like us, we had relatives in the safe part, which became the West Bank, to help us. For a year, we went from home to home, starting from the old city in Jerusalem where my grandmother lived, then going to Bethlehem. We had some cousins who took care of us. We stayed in their home, and my aunt lived in Beit Jala, and we visited. So for a whole year, we went from home to home, and people were feeding us and taking care of us. Then we found out that there's nothing that is going to change. We had to fend for ourselves. And my mother became very, very sick. She's very sensitive. And living in somebody else's home and having children, she didn't want us to make any noise. She didn't want us to eat too much. We were eating their food. She didn't want us to play around and get out of her sight. And at the same time, she, being a mother, felt terrible that we were deprived of our childhood, It was hard for her. Now, the rest of the people in the villages, all through Palestine, they just left because they were blowing their houses and causing. Deir Yassin is an example that terrorized people at the time. And they were afraid of losing their life, so they ran. There's a story of a woman we used to hear who was holding on to something, thinking it was her toddler, a little child, and come to find out it was a bag. And she had left her son, all kinds of stories. They left everything. And about 3/4 of a million refugees left all the coastal areas and Palestine and went to what became the West Bank. The United Nations then came and put them in tents for a while. And then when it was obvious that their condition is not going to improve, and things were not going to go back to normal. And the armistice line was placed. There was no hope going back.
Nina, you are
Stayed
back.
in
There was
these
some issue with
refugee
the-
camps.
We can
Excuse
hear
me,
you
I
now.
can't hear you.
We can hear you now. Sorry, there was a little issue
I didn't
with the
hear.
connection. Now you're back.
Oh, what? Okay. Did I answer, Nidar? Did I answer your question? Did you hear me? Did I answer that question? Anyway,
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
nobody is. See,
Yes, it was all clear.
okay, so
Thank you.
did that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. We have also Professor Pape.
But
that wants to
these
add
people,
some-
the 2 generations after that are there, yeah. What's going on?
It's okay. Nidal, I
Are
see
you
that
frozen?
Mona wants to ask.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're glitched.
Can you hear us, Nina?
Can you hear us well? You're not frozen, huh? We can see you very well.
But she's gone now.
Is she?
Yeah.
Oh my
She's
God.
gone from. Okay.
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 Anyway, I wanted to add something to Nidal's question. So Mona, hopefully by the time you ask a question, Nina would be back.
Thank you.
Just for the interest of Nidal, I'm involved now in a big project with a friend of mine, Johnny Mansour, and we are mapping the way Palestinian communities all over Palestine between 48 to 1950, for 2 years before the United Nations came and took over the issue of refugees, how for 2 years, amazing stories of Palestinian communities who were living in towns of 5,000 people or villages of 500 people and hosted sometimes for a whole year 50,000 refugees. They were themselves very poor and they shared everything they had with these refugees. This is a story nobody tells, nobody wrote about. And we are writing now a huge book about it because we were surprised, and we're still lucky that enough people like Nina are still around to tell us from both sides, you know, the family that hosted and the family of the refugees. I'm not idealizing it. Of course, sometimes, as Nina said, it was not easy, you know, sharing the food, which was meager. In the case of the villages, sharing the water was not easy.
Yeah.
Everyone took part in it, which is very interesting. Even the Druze villages in the Galilee, which had their own baggage when it came to 48, nonetheless, made sure that everyone who was hosted as a refugee had a place to stay, food, water. It's an incredible story of solidarity that hasn't been told.
Wow.
And of course, as I say, recollections like Nina and others are very, very important. Oral history in this case, only oral history. I mean, we have documentation. We worked on the archives of all the municipalities of the West Bank, and which most of them are organized. But anyway, I see that Nina is back and Mona has a question, which is far more important.
Personalizing the story adds to the humanity of the suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Doctor.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm really looking forward to reading that book, Ilan, when it comes out. It's a very important part of our history, which hasn't been documented.
Exactly.
I wrote my question in the chat, but I will say, Nina, first of all, I loved your memoir because it is an oral history. It is a primary source for all of us who are hungry for information and also for researchers to come so that they can hear it from the people who lived it. So thank you for writing that marvelous book. My question for you today is, being a Christian Palestinian American myself, and having heard from my mother of her experiences with Muslims and Jews in Jerusalem as she was growing up, I'm interested in hearing how your family related to the Muslim and Jewish populations in Jerusalem. Did you have Muslim or Jewish friends? Did you interact with them over the holidays? Did they come over to your home for Easter to tell you, Kul Sani wa Antum Salmin, to wish you well? Did you go to their homes? Did you have classmates who were Muslim or Jewish? Tell me.
Thank you, Muna, for asking this question. Yes, this is important. I personally I went to a school where there were Jewish people as well as Arabs, Christians and Muslims. So my classmates were mixed like that. And my best friend was Shoshana, a Jewish girl I named my doll after her. She was a very close friend. And from what I hear my parents say, they had Jewish friends, and you probably would remember Mura Zakaria in the Bay Area. Yes. Well, my cousin Isa, who is a Christian, married her, and she was Jewish. Even that was not, actually was a little of a taboo, but it happened. But people had friends. And if you read anything by Khalil Sakakini, you would know that friends were Muslims. And so did Dumya and Hala, when they went to school. People, there was no, also another person, Ghada Karmi, wrote about living in Karmi, yeah. Her family was Muslim. We didn't even notice that these people, our neighbors, were Muslims. And when we lived in Bethlehem, our best friends and close neighbors were the Risas family. They're Jerusalemites from an old family in Jerusalem. They were our best friends. We went to parties with them. We would go dancing with them. I went to school, to a secular school in Bethlehem, Al-Ummeh, they used to call it college, Al-Ummeh College. My classmates were predominantly Muslims. There were a few Christians there. We never distinguished between, after the Nakba, we didn't have any Jewish people around because they were in Israel, and we never communicated. But religion did not play a part in that. And during the Ottoman regime, the Ottomans, as people don't talk very favorably about them, both Christians and Muslims at the time. I know from my father, he would relate stories about his life under the Ottoman. But they had one good thing, is that they allowed the different religions to practice their religion without any interference, with freedom. And the civil courts were all in the hands of the religious groups, like laws that have to do with marriage, inheritance, and all that, following the religious practices of the time, where that was done. And the British then followed the status quo. They used their method of not distinguishing between Christians, Muslims, or Jews. So anyone, although, at the time, I remember the adults talking about the British, sorry to say that to you, and their policy of divide and rule. They wanted, like they did in India, the caste the divisions of the caste. They wanted to accentuate the difference so they could rule. That
Yeah.
was, I heard that over and over, divide and rule.
Well, you're right. And
yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to add that this rule of divide and conquer was also adopted by the Haganah, because
Yes.
I have a story of my husband's family who lived in Upper Ba'a, the neighborhood in West Jerusalem. And, a few months before the Nakba took place, Moshe Dayan, with his group of officials, went to my husband's great-grandfather's house, where they met with all of the Christian Palestinians who lived there, asking if these Christians would side with the Haganah against the Muslims who lived in the neighborhood. And they said no. Of course, they said no. We're all Palestinians, And the next day, the Haganah threw grenades and bombs in the neighborhood, and they killed two young girls, teenagers, who lived next door to my husband's family home. Yeah. So that's so true what you're saying there. And I want to add one other thing, is that in writing my own memoir, In My Mother's Footsteps, a Palestinian refugee returns home, I relate that, my mother was friends with Muslims and Jews, but things changed a little bit when there was the influx of European Jews. And she had a very good friend who sang with her at the choir of the YMCA. And her friend was a Jew from Germany who had arrived in 1938 to avoid the situation that was escalating in Germany. And one day, this Esther was her name, approached my mother and said to her, if your side wins, because she could tell the skirmishes that were happening, will you protect me? And my mother said, of course, Esther, you're my friend, When my mother went home and related that story to her father and brothers, her father very wisely said, did you ask her if their side wins?
Yeah.
And my mother said, no, I did not ask. So the following practice for choir happened the next week. My mother went and asked Esther, and Esther said, oh no, I can't do that. It's too big of a risk for my family. And of course, this is where the friendship could not continue under those kinds of circumstances. But these were the European Jews who came with baggage and tremendous anxiety from what they had lived. To some extent, I can understand that, but that they could not bridge that divide, in their friendship. So anyway, I spoke too much. Thank you.
No, that is a good answer too. One thing I want to say though, if you read, of course it's in Arabic, Khalil Sakakini's memoir, he mentions the story, and also, let me say, a Jewish historian, well-known, Tom Segev. Yeah, wrote about it, and he wrote a lot about Khalil Sakakini, but he mentioned this incident. This was during the Ottoman regime. Uncle Khalil was in the old city in Jerusalem, and this Jewish American came to him in the middle of the night, sneaked in and said, I need protection. Could you protect me? And because he was an American Jew, and the Ottomans wanted them to register or something, and he kept him, he gave him shelter. He endangered himself and gave him the hospitality that is very Arabic. The Arabs are known for their hospitality, to the point where he endangered himself. And when the Ottomans found out, come to find out, this fellow, Levine was his name, was an observing Jew, and he wouldn't eat their food. So his wife would bring some food in the middle of the night for him to eat while he was there in the old city. And the Ottomans followed her one time, found that he was harbored by Khalil Sakakini. They both had to go to jail and would have been executed because they had broken the law. And Khalil would break the law to give shelter to a man that he didn't even know that much, but who came seeking his hospitality. The Arabs are known for their honor in helping others, and in old stories, you know, in the history of Umar bin al-Khattab and all these stories about putting your guests ahead of you, being hospitable. That's an Arabic trait. But anyway, the point is that this fellow who was Jewish was imprisoned in Syria with Uncle Khalil, and it was a horrible thing. If it wasn't for the fact that the British won the war and they came, that's how they were released. They would have spent their life in prison. And those of you who are interested in that, read in that book. It's called Palestine. One Palestine. It's called
One Palestine Complete.
Complete, yeah. And it mentions a lot about Khalil Sakakini in that book. That's my father's uncle. Oh, there's so much to tell and so much to mention about the injustice done to the Palestinians then and continues to happen now. You know, I belong to a lot of organizations now that try to advocate for peace. We are, one of our members is Kuttab, Jonathan Kuttab, who actually was the founder of Al-Haq. You mentioned something about Raja Shahade. He worked with Raja Shahade to establish that organization, a peaceful organization, and now it is accused of being a terrorist group, one of 6 NGOs. Oh, yeah. What's that sound?
It's all right. It was the echo of someone with the microphone open. You can keep on, Nina. No problem.
That was me. Sorry, Mom.
I'm afraid somebody's going to get me. I still react to sound funny. I'm an old person. And I've lived all my life, you know, away most of my life. I still react to thunder and lightning as if it is the Semiramis all over again, or anything that's happened in our early. The marks that have been imprinted in us as refugees and as a result of the Nakba have not been erased. Each one of us in my family, my parents, my father died broken-hearted in this country, mostly because he said, I get out of my apartment, I go down the street, I greet people. They don't know who I am. They don't know anything about my past. They don't know anything about my background. They think here's a foreigner who can't even speak our language. It was so heartbreaking. He missed his way of life. He missed people greeting him the minute he would walk on the street. Alain Abu Hanna, they called him Abu Hanna because men were called by the name of their eldest son. And my mother was known as Hanna. But my mother adapted. And those others that I haven't mentioned, I taught in the refugee camps. Those people in those camps are 2nd and 3rd generation Palestinians who are continuously struggling against all the odds, and you hear all kinds of stories about what continues to happen there. I think, Francisco, you have the privilege of experiencing all that.
Yeah, I mean, I can sadly see it every day, and indeed,
Yeah, it is
true.
sad. Sad that
We have Professor Nadia that would like to add to a couple of comments.
yes.
Yeah, thank you, Nina, and thank you also, Muna, for sharing us stories. I have a couple of comments on this divide and rule. Actually, recently, I can't remember which year, probably 3-4 years ago, there was Israel passed a law. It's called Christian law, claiming that Christians are not Arabs, and they are our alliances, and if they approve it, they would get privileges from us. But of course, Christians rejected it. I don't think it is effective anymore, but that's recent, you know. On the issue of protecting, I must share with you my experience in the first Intifada as an activist. I mean, yes, maybe there are stories where, like your story, Nina, Muna, that Esther refused to protect the Palestinian. But in the first Intifada, when Israeli groups used to protest and come to demonstrations with us, they protected us from Israeli. They tried to protect us from Israeli soldiers. They would go to the front line to protect us, and they would reprimand the soldiers in Hebrew to protect us as well. Unfortunately, after 2000, the fragmentation and the division, it's like a circle, you know. Now we have a whole generation of Palestinians and Israelis that they only meet if in violent hot spots. It's not like my generation that would meet in demonstrations calling for peace, or even you know, shopping. Israelis used to come and shop in Nablus and Qalqilia and Tulkarem. I mean, my students at Birzeit, I had a student who was 20 years old. He said to me in 2005, I guess, in his whole life, has never been outside Ramallah. Never. So, I mean, yeah, the problem is also how the situation developed, and this fragmentation beyond the wall, behind the wall, beyond the checkpoint. It's like that's the reality now.
Yeah.
Come and see.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, Professor Nadia, I just wanted to add that that resonated with me. My mother took, I'm one of 4 siblings, and there are 3 girls. She took us in 2000, and we had an openness of travel and experience that was very unique to my mother, and kind of a treasured moment, basically, because after that, there was you know, and the hostilities kind of resumed. And when she took my brother,
Intifada.
yes, and when she took my brother in 2007, he had an extremely opposite experience than us. As soon as he arrived, he was pulled in Tel Aviv in the airport and interrogated for hours. He was accused of being homosexual. He was told that his grandfather was a terrorist. He said, my grandfather has been has passed away, an American, lived in the United States for many years. And they just, kept him there. My mother was extremely upset. And then they crossed into Jordan later in their trip. And on their way back, they also pulled my brother again and interrogated him once more, to the point where my mother was almost hysterical in tears. And finally, they let him go. So yes, I see in our experience, the drastic difference between that point and later.
Yeah, actually, I must tell you also, during the check, before the second intifada, I remember it very well. When there was like a checkpoint, we call them flying checkpoints, those temporary ones. I mean, Palestinians would compare notes. Sometimes they say, oh, go now, because the soldier there is nice. He will let you, or she will let you pass. Nowadays, this does not exist. They are all the same. There's no mercy among Israeli soldiers at the checkpoint at present time.
Yeah. But so to not only there, look at what is happening in the world now with anyone who, with BDS, with any affiliation with that, they accuse you of being anti-Semitic or playing that card. And then there's always something that is just going to win the sympathy of the world. No, they can't play the Holocaust card anymore. So they're now accusing people to the point that they want to silence those who are pacifists. Now, I'm a pacifist, really, at this point in my life. I didn't used to be so much as I am now. And still, like, I belong to an organization, we're even thinking now, Jonathan Kutab wrote a book now about advocating one state, the one state where there is equality. It's like a dream that could be actualized. To be fair, we try so hard to look at the international law and stick to things that can be done to help ease the situation that's going on now. This problem has existed for too long, and the people who are there are really worried. I have friends in Bethlehem now, some students at the Bethlehem University who would love to stay there, but there's no opportunities for work. And just recently, some of my friends, maybe if I say it loud, I will be targeted. But some of my friends who have given their home to make it into an art center has been sabotaged in Bethlehem. It's at the entrance of Bethlehem. And the daughters of this neighbor of mine who gave his house to that are both artists. One is a film producer, the Jasser family. They ransacked their home, this center, this art center, and burned things and looted some of the media, I mean the computers and things from that place for no reason whatsoever, because they're threatened. Those girls write movies and produce movies, and their film, and the artists too, that tell the Arabic story, tell the Palestinian story. That is itself is the only accusations they can have against them. And so they don't want anyone to tell the truth. Actually, this is it. Once you engage in telling what happens, like I'm telling you simple stories about what happened to me personally, then you are targeted and you have to account for that. So what do we do? What do we do? What is the solution?
What's the point now? Well, thank you, Nina. Really
You're
so much. I would like still, I mean, still we have a little bit of time. So someone else has, if you, Nina, you are available again, I mean, for another 5 minutes, and someone else wants to ask other questions, we have a little bit more of time. So just no. Okay, I see Nada Daquino that raised her hand. You have the floor.
That Nada is my daughter. She lives in New York. She's my daughter. Okay, go ahead.
I just, my camera wasn't really working, so I switched to my phone, and that loud noise was my fault, so sorry about that. But I just wanted to say I'm really proud of you, Mom, with this book, and I'm happy that my kids have this memoir for them to know about their family and their grandmother, their Tata, and I love you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome, sweetie. That's very sweet. Yeah. Maybe by the time they grow up, that there would have been a solution to the Palestinian problem and they can live in peace. Muna, I think yeah.
Yeah.
Muna.
Well, Neda, it's so nice that you've said those words, because I often think that that's what every Palestinian who has a story about Palestine, whether lived it themselves or their parents or grandparents, if everybody could tell those stories to their children or write them down, because it's hard. I have Palestinian friends who tell me I have a hard time knowing what happened because my parents were so traumatized by what happened that they didn't share stories with us. And now they're gone and I regret it. There's nothing I can pass on to my children. So I agree with you, Neda, that it's a wonderful gift your mother has given you and has given the world by writing down her stories and her recollections. Good for you, Neda, and for you, Nina.
Thank you, and I really have to thank my children because they are also an inspiration for writing that book. And now I'm going to do a second volume. Maybe I can talk about the situation more objectively from outside.
Sure. It will be, and of course we will be happy and eager to know more about the second volume. And if I can add just one very last thing that I think, I mean, I just want to share since I feel this is the environment. Like, I would also like to say that it's important, I mean, to have these memories. It's important also for us. I'm an Italian guy coming here to Palestine, doing NGO work. And I think that also, I mean, for my generation, this kind of work is fundamental because we come here to see a situation that has not always been like this. It has changed a lot, but we tend to focus and also to only see what's present now. And I think this narrows a lot the potential, the ideas that we can have for the future. So these testimonies are absolutely precious, and absolutely, I mean, while understanding, while knowing more about your story and listening to your stories, I absolutely fell in love with each one of them, and I could see the richness and see the places that I work on every day in a totally different light, and this was absolutely awesome and wonderful. And really, I'm totally convinced that these words can make a whole difference in this sense. They can help us see that we can see in the future a different Palestine, decolonized Palestine, a Palestine that is a land for everyone. That this is what we hope in our hearts. And so with this, I want to thank you so much.
Nina, I just wanted to thank you for this, but also say maybe your second book could also be answers to questions that were sparked by your first book, because this is the second session we've sat in, and the questions have always been, you could write books about each question, but that would certainly be a jumping off point, I think.
Now Linda is married to my brother. There he is next to her. Hannah, I mentioned that when we Samira missing my mother holding him, she saved his life. And yeah, I know. I am very delighted to be given the chance to tell my story. Actually, I always felt maybe it was insignificant because I taught school in the refugee camps. I know how hard it was for my students living in those camps, second generation, now third generation. It wasn't an easy life. I taught 9 years for UNRWA. Then they gave me a scholarship to go to Beirut and get my degree after being a teacher. Then I became a school principal. Anyway, they took us from high school and trained us to become teachers. So I taught in Dheche, if you hear about Dheche camp there. And so those lovely young innocent children who came from homes where there was nothing. And I think the world owes them some recognition. They have suffered enough. And if you want peace in the world, it should start in places like the refugee camps where the kids there can be taught to rely on international communities to help them out. And what's that you want? Oh, and my daughter say, I want you to thank Francisco for what he's doing. I did thank you.
Nothing. Absolutely. It was nothing, and it was just a pleasure. Absolutely.
Very good. I hope you're the generation that is going to help us maybe overcome this animosity and all the evil that has been harbored in people's mind, and the politics and the leaders who are not helping anyone much. Maybe our hope is in the young generation now here who is educated, who look at BDS as a means of struggle rather than the weapons that we in this country lavish to help settle problems, and instead we're causing more problems with that. So peace will come only through that. Those of you who understanding, for one thing, maybe listening to us who know a little more about what really happened, and getting you to advocate for peace in our future world, all over the world. Actually, we have enough natural problems to solve, like the COVID and all that. These are problems created by human beings that should be ended by human beings like you and your colleagues. Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you for your words. I will treasure them, and I totally agree. It's up to us and building connections with our Palestinian fellows and boys and girls like us, absolutely, together. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if we don't have any other questions or comments, I don't know. Okay, I would sadly, I have to say, go to close this session. And I want to thank you, Nina, so much for being here. I will stop the recording here.